Am I on? I'm on. Okay. Yeah. Um, I'm going to be reading today from Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an epidemic of mental illness. And I want to begin by giving you sort of an introduction to who Jonathan Haidt is, if you're not already familiar with him. He is the Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership at NYU's Stern School of Business, and he is a social psychologist. And I believe that he is one of the most astute observers of social phenomenon that we have today. I first became familiar with him because of his 2012 book, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. I was always on the lookout for books that would help me know how to talk to family members and friends who were on the opposite side of the political divide in a sensitive way. And this is the best book I've ever found on that particular subject. And then more recently, in 2019, Jonathan Haidt co-authored with Greg Lukianoff, The Coddling of the American Mind: How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation of Failure, which is about helicopter parenting, essentially. Um, so this particular book is one that really blew me away as somebody whose career involved um, mental health with adolescents and children. And I guess it blew away a lot of other parents and grandparents because it was number one on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list in 2024. Um, what he starts with is the observation that between the years 2010 and 2020, anxiety, depression, and self-harm in adolescents more than doubled in frequency in a 10-year period. So you might ask, why? Well, any good and complete explanation is probably going to be a multi-causal explanation. And so you can look at things like this is the first generation who can't expect to be more economically well off than their parents, that the environment is a mess, that our economy is a mess, that our democracy is becoming less democratic. And as Joel pointed out to me, David Brooks says it's because this is the most rejected generation in terms of rejections on college applications and for internships and so forth. So there are other reasons that we have this spike in mental health, but Haidt argues that one of the really most significant ones is that in 2007, the smartphone came into being and into widespread use. And I'm distinguishing here the smartphone with internet connectivity from flip phones and other phones. So that, and then a year later, the Apple Store and Google Marketplace provided any app you want to any age person for unrestricted use. So all of a sudden, um, adolescents and younger were spending an average of more than 7 hours per day. Some say it's now up to 9 hours per day on their screens, not just phones, but laptops and other screens too, on the internet. And so he is looking at how this replaced the kind of face to face interactions with family and friends that we were all used to growing up. So, before I get into how he describes this, I would invite you to just take 10 or 15 seconds to think about what you were typically doing in your leisure time after school between, say, the ages of 8 and 15. Just take a minute to think about that. Okay.
Shall we text you the answer?
So, just to briefly summarize it, and then I'm going to read some. Teens are now spending an average of 7 hours a day on screen time. They have unlimited connectivity to social media, pornography, and violent video games during that time. And this, to a large extent, replaces face to face interactions with family and friends. Um, and so I struggled with how I was going to capture the essence of a 400-page book in 30 minutes. Fortunately, Jonathan Haidt has put bullet points at the end of each chapter. So, what I'm going to do is read you the bullet points, and then at the end, he has a prescription for how we should reorder childhood and adolescence in a meaningful way that I'll conclude with. Uh, Keep in mind that 2010 to 2020, we're talking about Gen Z mainly, those who were born between 1995 and 2010, who were the oldest of whom were just reaching adolescence in 2010 when this spike in mental illness occurred. And these are the young people who are now eh, in late teens or 20s, approaching 30. Human childhood is very different from that of any other animal. Children's brains grow up to 90% of full size by age 5, but then take a long time to configure themselves. This slow growth childhood is an adaptation for cultural learning. Childhood is an apprenticeship for learning the skills needed for success in one's culture. Free play is essential for developing social skills like conflict resolution, as it is for developing physical skills. But play based childhoods were replaced by phone based childhoods as children and adolescents moved their social lives and free time onto internet connected devices. Children learn through play to connect, synchronize, and take turns. They enjoy attunement and need enormous quantities of it. Attunement and synchrony bond pairs, groups, and whole communities. Social media, in contrast, is mostly asynchronous and performative. It inhibits attunement and leaves heavy users starving for social connection. Children are born with two innate learning programs that help them to acquire their local culture. Conformist bias motivates them to copy whatever seems the most common. Prestige bias motivates them to copy uh, whoever seems to be the most accomplished and prestigious. Social media platforms, which are engineered for engagement, hijack social learning and drown out the culture of one's family and local communities while locking children's eyes onto influencers of questionable value. Social learning occurs throughout childhood, but there may be a sensitive period for cultural learning that spans roughly ages 9 through 15. Lessons learned and identities formed in these years are likely to imprint or stick more than at other ages. These are the crucial sensitive years of puberty. Unfortunately, they are also years in which most adolescents in developed countries get their own phones and move their social lives online. The human brain contains two subsystems that put it into two common modes: discover mode for approaching opportunities, and defend mode for defending against threats. Young people born after 1995 are more likely to be stuck in defend mode compared to those born earlier. They are not they are on permanent alert for threats rather than being hungry for new experiences. They are anxious. All children are by nature anti-fragile. Just as the immune system must be exposed to germs and trees must be exposed to wind, children require exposure to setbacks, failures, shocks, and stumbles in order to develop strength and self reliance. Overprotection interferes with this development and renders young people more likely to be fragile and fearful as adults. Kids must have a great deal of free play to develop, and they benefit from risky physical play, which has antiphobic effects. Kids seek out the level of risk and thrill that they are ready for in order to master the fears and develop competencies. Risk taking online may not have comparable antiphobic effects. In the 1980s and especially the 1990s, parents in Anglo countries became more fearful for many reasons, including changes in the media ecosystem and news cycle. They lost trust in each other. They started spending far more time supervising their own children, and they did more parenting in defend mode, seeing risks and threats everywhere. The worship of safety above all else is called safetyism. It is dangerous because it makes it harder for children to learn to care for themselves and to deal with risk, conflict, and frustration. The attachment system evolved to help young mammals learn the skills they needed to reach adulthood while while retreating to their secure base when they feel threatened. Fearful parenting keeps children on home base too much, preventing them from having the experience they need to grow strong and to develop a secure attachment style. Children are most likely to thrive when they have play based childhood in the real world. They are less likely to thrive when fearful parenting and phone based childhood deprives them of opportunities for growth. Early puberty is a period of rapid brain rewiring, second only to the first few years of life. Neural pruning and myelination are occurring at a very rapid rate, guided by the adolescent's experiences. We should be concerned about those experiences and not let strangers and algorithms choose them. Safetyism is an experience blocker. When we make children's safety a quasi sacred value and don't allow them to take any risks, we block them from overcoming anxiety, learning to manage risk, and learning to be self governing, all of which are essential for becoming healthy and competent adults. Smartphones are a second kind of experience blocker. Once they enter a child's life, they push out or reduce all other forms of non phone based experience, which is the kind that their experience expectant brains most need. Rites of passage are the curated sets of experiences that human societies arranged to help adolescents make the transition to adulthood. Van Gennep noted that these rites usually have a separation phase, a transformation phase, and a reincorporation phase. Western societies have eliminated many rites of passage, and the digital world that opened up in the 1990s eventually buried most milestones and obscured the path to adulthood. Once children began spending much or most of their time online, the inputs to their developing brains became undifferentiated torrents of stimuli with no age grading or age restrictions. A society that is large, diverse, and secular, such as the United States or the UK, might still agree to a set of milestones that mark stepwise increases in freedom and responsibilities. The sheer amount of time that adolescents spend with their phones is staggering, even compared with the high levels of screen time they had before the invention of the iPhone. Studies of time use routinely find that the average teen reports spending more than 7 hours a day on screen based leisure activities, not including school and homework. The opportunity cost of a phone based childhood refers to everything that children do less of once they get unlimited round the clock access to the internet. The first foundational harm is social deprivation. When American adolescents moved on to smartphones, time with friends in face to face settings plummeted immediately from 122 minutes per day in 2012 down to 67 minutes per day in 2019. Time with friends dropped further because of COVID restrictions, but Gen Z was already socially distanced before COVID restrictions were put into place. The second fundamental harm is sleep deprivation. As soon as adolescents moved from basic phones to smartphones, their sleep declined in both quality and quantity around the developed world. Longitudinal studies show that smartphone use came first and was followed by sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation is extremely well studied, and its effects are far reaching. They include depression, anxiety, irritability, cognitive deficits, poor learning, lower grades, more accidents, and more deaths from accidents. The third fundamental harm is attention fragmentation. Attention is the ability to stay on one mental road while many off ramps beckon. Staying on a road, staying on a task, is a feature of maturity and a sign of good executive function. But smartphones are kryptonite for attention. Many adolescents get hundreds of notifications per day, meaning that they rarely have 5 or 10 minutes to think without an interruption. There is evidence that fragmentation of attention in early adolescence, caused by problematic use of social media and video games, may interfere with the development of executive function. The fourth fundamental harm is addiction. The behaviorists discovered that learning for animals is the wearing smooth of a path in the brain. The developers of the most successful social media apps use advanced behavioral techniques to hook children into becoming heavy users of their products. Dopamine release is pleasurable, but it does not trigger a feeling of satisfaction. Rather, it makes you want more of whatever you did to trigger the release. The addiction researcher Anna Lembecki says that the universal symptoms of withdrawal are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, and dysphoria. She and other researchers find that many adolescents have developed behavioral addictions that are very much like the way that people develop addictions to slot machine gambling, with profound consequences for their well being, their social development, and their families. When we put these four foundational harms together, they explain why mental health got so much worse so suddenly as soon as childhood became phone based. Social media harms girls more than boys. Correlational studies show that heavy users of social media have higher rates of depression and other disorders than light users or non users. The correlation is larger and clearer for girls. Heavy users are 3 times as likely to be depressed as non users. Experimental studies show that social media use is a cause, not just a correlate, of anxiety and depression. When people are assigned to reduce or eliminate social media for 3 weeks or more, their mental health usually improves. Several quasi experiments show that when Facebook came to campuses or when high speed internet came to regions and provinces, mental health declined, especially for girls and young women. Girls use social media a lot more than boys, and they prefer visually oriented platforms such as Instagram and TikTok, which are worse for social comparisons than primarily text based platforms such as Reddit. Two major categories of motivations are agency, the desire to stand out and have an effect on the world, and communion, the desire to connect and develop a sense of belonging. Boys and girls both want each of these, but there is a gender difference that emerges early in children's play. Boys choose more agency activities, girls choose more communion activities. Social media appeals to the desire for communion, but it often ends up frustrating it. There are at least four reasons why social media harms girls more than boys. The first is that girls are more sensitive to visual comparisons, especially when other people praise or criticize one's face and body. Visually oriented social media platforms that focus on images of oneself are ideally suited to pushing down a girl's sociometer, the internal gauge of where one stands in relation to others. Girls are also more likely to develop socially prescribed perfectionism, in which a person tries to live up to impossibly high standards held by others or by society. The second reason is that girls' aggression is often expressed in attempts to harm the relationships and reputations of other girls, whereas boys' aggression is more likely to be expressed in physical ways. Social media has offered girls endless ways to damage other girls' reputations and relationships. The third reason is that girls and women more readily share emotions. When everything moved online and girls became hyperconnected, girls with anxiety or depression might have influenced many other girls to develop anxiety and depression. Girls are also more vulnerable to sociogenic illnesses, which means illnesses caused by social influences rather than from a biological cause. The fourth reason is that the internet has made it easier for men to approach and stalk girls and women and to behave badly toward them while avoiding accountability. When preteen girls open social media accounts, they are often followed and contacted by older men, and they are pressured by boys in their school to share nude photographs of themselves. Social media is a trap that ensnares more girls than boys. It lures people in with promise of connection and communion, but then it multiplies the number of relationships while reducing their quality, therefore making it harder to spend time with a few close friends in real life. This may be why loneliness spiked so sharply among girls in the early 2010s, while for boys, the rise was more gradual. Like girls, boys got more depressed and anxious in the early 2010s in many countries. Unlike girls, boys experienced a slow decline since the 1970s in achievement and engagement in schoolwork and family life. Boys and young men withdrew much of their time and effort from the physical world, which was increasingly opposed to unsupervised play, exploration, and risk taking, and invested it in the rapidly expanding virtual world. Boys are at greater risk than girls of failure to launch. They are more likely to become young adults who are not in education, employment, or training. Some Japanese men developed an extreme form of lifelong withdrawal to their bedrooms. They are called hikikomori. In the early 2010s, American teen boys' thinking patterns shifted from what they had traditionally been: higher rates of externalizing cognitions and behavior than internalizing, to a pattern more commonly shown by girls: higher rates of internalizing. At the same time, boys also began to shun risk. more so than happened for girls. As boys engaged in fewer risky activities outdoors or away from home and began spending more time at home on screens, their mental health did not decline in the 1990s and the 2000s, but something changed in the early 2010s, and their mental health then began to decline. Once boys got smartphones, they, like girls, moved even more of their social life online, and their mental health declined. One way that smartphones, amplified by high speed internet, have affected boys' lives is by providing unlimited, free, hardcore pornography accessible anytime, anywhere. Porn is an example of how tech companies have made it easy for boys to satisfy powerful, evolved desires without having to develop any skills that would help them make the transition to adulthood. Video games offer boys and girls a number of benefits, but there are also harms, especially for the subset of boys, which is in the ballpark of 7%, who end up as problematic or addicted users. For them, video games do seem to cause declining mental health and physical health, family strife, and difficulties in other areas of life. As with social media for girls, spending hours connecting with others online produces an increase in the quantity of social interactions and a decrease in the quality of social relationships. Boys, like girls, become lonelier during the Great Rewiring. Some boys use video games to strengthen their real world packs, but for many others, video games made it easier for them to retreat to their bedrooms rather than doing the hard work of maturing in the real world. The great rewiring of childhood pulled young people out of real world communities, including their own families, and created a new kind of childhood lived in multiple, rapidly shifting networks. One inevitable result was anomie, or normlessness, because stable and binding moralities cannot form when everything is in flux, including the members of the network. As the sociologist Emile Durkheim showed, anomie breeds despair and suicide. This may be why boys and girls who followed different paths through the Great Rewiring ended up in the same place, with a sudden and rapid increase in the feeling that their lives were meaningless. Now I will share with you what Jonathan Haidt thinks we should do about this. He suggests that we focus on even birthdays from age 6 through 18 and reinstitute recognition of increased responsibility with certain rituals at each age. Age 6 is the age of family responsibility. Children are formally recognized as important contributors to the household, not just as dependents. As an example, they can be given a small amount of chores and a small weekly allowance that is contingent upon their performance of those chores. Age 8, he calls the age of local freedom. Children gain the freedom to play and hang out in groups without adult supervision. They should show that they can take care of each other, and they begin running local errands if there are stores within a short walk or bike ride. They should not be given adult cell phones, but they could be given a phone or watch designed for children that would allow them to call or text a small number of people, such as their parents and siblings. At age 10 is the age of roaming. Preteens gain the freedom to roam more widely, perhaps equivalent to what their parents were allowed to do at age of 8 or 9. They should show good judgment to do more to help their families, consistent with their increased mobility and responsibility. A flip phone or other basic phone with a few apps and no internet access might be given as a birthday present. They should not have most afternoons filled with adult-led enrichment activities. They need time to hang out with friends in person. Age 12 is the age of apprenticeship. At 12, which is around the age that many societies begin rites of initiation, adolescents should begin finding more adult mentors and role models beyond their parents. Adolescents should be encouraged to start earning their own money by doing chores for neighbors or relatives, such as raking leaves or working as a mother's helper for a neighbor with an infant or toddler. They might be encouraged to spend more time with trusted relatives without their parents present. At age 14, the beginning of high school. The 14th birthday comes around the time that high school begins, and this is a major transition during which independence increases along with academic pressure, time pressure, and social pressure. Activities such as working for pay and joining an athletic team are good ways to discover that hard work leads to tangible and pleasurable rewards. The beginning of high school would be a reasonable target for a national norm, not a law, about the minimum age at which teens get their first smartphone. At age 16 is the beginning of internet adulthood. This should be a big year of independence, conditional on showing a history of responsibility and growth since the previous step. The U.S. Congress should undo the mistakes it made in 1998 when it made 13 the age at which children can sign contracts with corporations to open accounts and give away their data without their parents' knowledge or consent. I believe the age should be raised to 16 and enforced. The 16th birthday would become a major milestone at which we say to teens, you can now get a driver's license and you can now sign certain kinds of contracts without any legal requirement for parental consent. You can now open social media accounts as well. There are good arguments for waiting until 18, but I think 16 would be the right minimum age to be established by law. Age 18 is the beginning of legal adulthood. This birthday would retain all of its legal significance, including the beginning of voting, eligibility for military service, and the ability to sign contracts and make life decisions. Because this birthday falls near high school graduation in the United States, it should be treated in Van Gennep's terms as both a separation from childhood and as the beginning of a transition period into the next phase of life. And finally, age 21, full legal adulthood. This birthday is the last one with any legal significance in the United States and many countries. At this age, one can buy alcohol and cigarettes, one can enter casinos and sign up for internet sports gambling. The person is now a full adult in the eyes of the law. Children do not turn into fully functioning adults on their own. Let's lay out some steps they can take that will help them get there. The end. Be glad to take questions.